new content creators added to the description, motherfucker!
Anyway, this is your chance. If you listen to me, you disagree with everything I say. This is your opportunity to come on here and speak your mind. Unlike other channels, you won't get muted, you won't get booted, you won't get ignored. You will be allowed to talk, and after you leave, I won't talk about you after you leave, because everything that's going to be said is going to be said while you're right here, and I'm right here, and everybody else on the panel is right there.
Fight against the Southpaw Havier syndrome, Kazuto Ioka was able to almost always be the first one to land a punch in the exchanges. He did it by a clever positioning of his gloves close to the target where they had a short traveling distance, despite Kazuto Ioka not being known for having a remarkably superior hand speed compared to the rest of his weight class.
Alright, BG Aloysius, Sweet Science Sports. Hey, I'm out. Hey, and one more thing, keep banking. Ding ding, motherfuckers. Peace.
My chick bad, my chick hood, my chick do stuff that your chick wish she could. My chick bad, my chick hood, my chick do stuff that your chick wish she could. My chick bad, better than girls. My chick bad, better than girls. My chick bad, better than girls. My chick bad, better.
Disclaimer, not actually RGM's chick. RGM is just subscribed to NECA and respects her boxing knowledge and content creation abilities. In no way, shape, or form has RGM and NECA actually been in a relationship at any point in time. Once again, this is just a promotion for NECA on her behalf by RGM.
Okay, so what's buzzing online right now in boxing is the Devin Haney situation where he said he wouldn't let any white boy beat him or, you know, all that good stuff. And everyone is up in arms, calling him a racist.
My chick bad, my chick hood, my chick do stuff that your chick wish she could. My chick. You can't fuck with Red Glove on this war state. How about that?
I ain't really changed, it's the same old rebel, still a radical. I'm passionate, it's just another level. AC told me I should fight back. They don't like that. Just know if you rock the boat, you better have a life raft. BJ told me I should fight back. They don't like that. Just know if you rock the boat, you better have a life raft.
What up, everybody in the YTBC? This is just gonna be another quick one. So I heard a debate recently where they were basically talking about this era versus previous eras, and one of the people in the debate, he said something that I found to be very interesting. He was saying that in the even in the 90s that the belts didn't mean nothing. So I want to talk about that real quick. Now, that is something that I hear being said quite often in pertaining to the current era. And when it comes to the current era, I disagree with it. However, I can definitely understand why a lot of boxing fans feel that way. When you have sanctioning bodies such as the WBC and the WBA who do things that really just nullify their own ranking system, then yeah, I can definitely understand why you would feel like the belts don't mean anything. When the WBC has a belt called the franchise belt, which doesn't change hands when the franchise champion loses, and also he is not held to fighting any kind of mandatories at any period of time, then yeah, I could definitely understand why you would feel like the belts don't mean anything, especially that particular belt, you know, the WBC. WBA, they have some weird shit that they do. WBO, you know, they also have some weird ass rules. You know, apparently they can take a vote and you won't be a champion, you know, if the vote doesn't go your way. IBF, they seem to be on the up and up. Their only problem is because all these other sanctioning bodies do some wacky ass shit, it leaves the IBF at a disadvantage, and their rank, the boxers who tend to go with them are usually not big names. The big names, I should say, they don't feel like dealing with the stringent IBF criteria, so they rather go to the WBC or the WBA or somewhere else where they can basically do whatever the fuck they want. So yeah, I understand why a lot of fans feel like these days the belts don't mean anything. Like I said, I don't agree with it, but I can understand the logic behind it. Now, as far as the 80s and the 90s, I definitely disagree, because things were not as muddied down by the WBC and the WBA and the IBF. WBO wasn't even considered a major belt at the time. That didn't come until, don't quote me on this, but I'm thinking 2006, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, but either way, there was only 3 belts that you needed to become undisputed, and there wasn't a super title, there wasn't a franchise title, there wasn't all these other bullshit titles that we have these days. So I can't subscribe to, well, the belts didn't mean anything back then either. One of the arguments that they use is, well, in Jack Johnson's day, they didn't have championship fights, which was false. They actually did have championship fights. It may have not been the WBA, it may have not been the WBC or the WBO or the IBF or the IBO or any of this other stuff we have these days, but they did still have championship bouts. You had the champion, which was considered to be the real champion, and then you had the colored champion, which was, they wouldn't allow, if you were African American, if you had dark skin, they wouldn't allow you to fight for the regular championship. You had to settle for the color championship. Anybody who knows the history would know that, Jack Johnson, he had to go to Australia in order to fight for that, what was considered the real championship belt. And that's kind of, that's really what started, the integration of white and colored boxers in the United States, because he came back and they couldn't just strip him of the belt, but anyways, this isn't even about that. The point is, there were championship bouts. Just because there wasn't a WBA and a WBC or IBF or WBO behind it doesn't mean that there wasn't championship bouts, because there absolutely was. It was just not sanctioned by the bodies that we know of today. Okay, and the sport has evolved over time as far as, how things are done and what is considered what. I mean, back in those days, they didn't do just 12 rounds. They did way more than 12 rounds back in Jack Johnson's day. So, I mean, if you're going to go by that, then you could say, well, we don't even have boxing anymore. These are just a bunch of pansy-ass bitches, and you just don't follow the sport at that point. But no, we still watch the sport. We still follow it, even though they are down to 12 rounds. Back in the 80s, it went up to 15. So the sport has just evolved over time, and part of that evolution has been these sanctioning bodies. So can't really say that the belts don't mean anything. Like I said, because of how the sanctioning bodies, basically say themselves that their rankings don't mean anything, I can understand why some fans would feel that way. I don't feel that way, simply because, this is how we rank boxers. It's supposed to be survival of the fittest. I'll use Charles Martin as an example. Charles Martin probably should have never held a belt. That's why he lost his belt first time he tried to defend it. Same thing with Bermain Stavern and many others. So that's what you know, that's why the belt still means something. Because if a guy gets a hold of a belt and he has no business holding it, if he's fighting the way he's supposed to and he's just not up to par, he's going to lose it to a better guy. And it should be sooner rather than later. But because we have a lot of these guys like Tank Davis who will get a belt and then, you know, bring guys up from lower weight classes, that's just one example. There's other boxers who are just as guilty. He's just the first one that came to mind. You know, then yeah, you're going to feel like the belt doesn't mean anything because the sanctioning bodies are not sticking to their guns the way that they should be. But anyways, these are just my thoughts on this whole, you know, the belts don't mean anything. Like I said, I can understand it for the current era, but I definitely don't understand it. I don't think it's logical at all for any previous eras, especially not in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You know, those belts were held to a much higher standard than they are now. They definitely meant something. To all my subscribers, anybody watching my videos, or if you just so happen to stumble on this video, I hope y'all have a wonderful and blessed day. Peace.
That's why I'm undefeated.